My name is Barbara, and I'm 68 years old. The scars on my face tell a story of survival, but to my son Jackson, they were just an embarrassment. When he told me I was too ugly for his wedding photos, something broke inside me. I sat quietly in the third row that day, watching him smile, completely unaware that I had already changed my will. He never knew that as he said, "I do," I was saying goodbye to the son who couldn't see past my scars. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And please hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to choose between your dignity and someone you love. I was 8 years old when the accident happened, a kitchen fire that spread faster than anyone could have predicted. I remember the heat, the panic, and then waking up in a hospital bed with bandages covering half my face. The doctors did their best, but some scars don't fade with time. 11 surgeries throughout my childhood and teenage years couldn't restore what was lost. School became a battlefield. Children can be cruel without even trying. Monster face, they called me. Freddy Krueger's daughter. I ate lunch alone in bathroom stalls and learned to keep my eyes down in hallways. My parents tried their best to shield me, but they couldn't be with me every minute of every day. Those years taught me resilience. I learned to find strength in solitude and to measure my worth beyond mirrors. By high school, I had built walls so high that few people even attempted to scale them. I buried myself in academics, finding comfort in numbers and equations that never judged appearances. But during my senior year, Harold Jenkins transferred to our school. Tall, with kind eyes and a laugh that made everyone around him smile. He was the first person who didn't look away when he saw me. "Your eyes," he said during our first conversation in chemistry class. "They're the most honest eyes I've ever seen." Harold didn't see my scars, or rather, he saw them, but they weren't what defined me to him. We married 3 years later, after finishing our associate degrees at the local community college. When Jackson was born in 1989, our family felt complete. Harold would place our infant son in my arms and say, "He has your spirit, Barbara. Strong and beautiful." Those were the happiest years of my life. Harold worked at his family's small manufacturing business while I raised Jackson and took accounting classes at night. We didn't have much, but we had enough. Jackson was a bright, curious child who brought sunshine into every room. He would touch my scarred cheek and ask innocent questions that I always answered honestly. "Mommy got hurt, but I'm okay now." He accepted this with the simple wisdom of childhood. Everything changed when Jackson turned 15. Harold had been complaining about heartburn for weeks, brushing off my concerns with his typical, "I'm fine" response. He collapsed one Tuesday afternoon at work. Massive heart attack. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. Just like that, the love of my life vanished, leaving me alone with a teenage son and a mountain of uncertainty. The insurance money helped initially, but it wasn't enough for long-term security. I took on 3 jobs. Bookkeeping at a local business during the day, waitressing evenings, and weekend work doing tax preparation. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. But Jackson needed stability, and I was determined to provide it. "Mom, you don't have to work so hard," Jackson would say, noticing my exhaustion. "Your education comes first," I'd always respond. "I'm fine." Despite my busy schedule, I never missed Jackson's basketball games or academic competitions. I sold Harold's beloved vintage car to pay for Jackson's SAT prep courses. When he received a partial scholarship to Westridge University, I took out a second mortgage to cover the remaining costs. His success became my purpose. During his first 2 years of college, Jackson came home regularly. We'd spend weekends watching old movies or hiking in the state park, just like we used to do with Harold. But junior year brought subtle changes. His calls became less frequent, his visits shorter. When he did come home, he spent most of his time texting friends. I told myself this was normal, a young man finding his independence. Meanwhile, Harold's brother Frank offered me a position managing finances for the family business. Years of hard work and night classes had earned me my accounting certification, and I had a natural head for numbers. The salary was better than all 3 of my previous jobs combined. For the first time since Harold's death, I could breathe financially. Frank also helped me invest some of Harold's insurance money that I had carefully saved. As the business grew, so did my investments. By the time Jackson was in his senior year of college, I had managed to build a comfortable nest egg. Harold's parents passed away, leaving their shares of the business to be divided among family, with a significant portion going to me as Harold's widow. I didn't realize it then, but I was becoming quite wealthy, something that would later factor significantly into my story. I was so proud of Jackson. Despite losing his father at a critical age, he maintained excellent grades and was poised to graduate with honors. What I didn't know was how much he was changing in ways that had nothing to do with education. Jackson graduated with a business degree and immediately landed a job at Meridian Consulting in Chicago. The starting salary made my eyes widen, more than I had made after years of accounting work. I helped him move into his first apartment, a sleek one-bedroom in a high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. "This is a bit expensive, isn't it?" I asked, concerned about his budget. "It's all about image in this business, Mom," he replied with a confidence I didn't recognize. "First impressions matter." I didn't miss his quick glance at my face when he said first impressions, but I brushed it aside. Jackson had never seemed bothered by my appearance before. Perhaps I was being oversensitive. 6 months after he started at Meridian, Jackson called to tell me he was bringing someone home for Thanksgiving. Vanessa Harrington. The name sounded like it belonged on a country club membership list. I spent days preparing, cleaning our modest home until it gleamed, cooking all of Jackson's favorite dishes. When they arrived, Vanessa was exactly as I had imagined, tall, blonde, with the kind of polished beauty that comes from generations of good breeding and expensive skincare. She wore designer clothes that I recognized from magazines, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never questioned her place in the world. "It's so nice to finally meet you, Mrs. Jenkins," she said, air-kissing near my cheek, careful not to make actual contact. "Jackson has told me so much about you." Her eyes lingered on my scars a beat too long, and I saw something flicker there, pity mixed with discomfort. I was used to these reactions, but it stung coming from someone important to my son. Throughout dinner, Vanessa spoke about her family's summer home in the Hamptons, her father's investment firm, her sorority sisters who were now scattered across exclusive addresses in New York and Los Angeles. Jackson nodded along, occasionally adding details about colleagues and networking events that sounded foreign to our usual conversations. When Jackson went to bring dessert from the kitchen, Vanessa looked around our living room with its second-hand furniture and family photos. "This is so quaint," she said, the word dripping with condescension. "Jackson told me you had a tough life. It must have been difficult raising him alone with your condition." Before I could respond, Jackson returned, and Vanessa's face transformed into a mask of warmth. That weekend marked the first hairline fracture in my relationship with my son. A crack so fine I could almost pretend it wasn't there. Over the next year, Jackson visited less frequently. When he called, our conversations revolved around his work accomplishments and social events with Vanessa. He began dropping names of executives and partners at his firm, explaining how important these connections were for his future. When I did visit Chicago, Jackson seemed tense, checking his watch frequently during our meals together. Once while walking down Michigan Avenue, we ran into his colleague Daniel. I noticed how Jackson angled himself during introductions, partially blocking me from view. He didn't mention I was his mother until Daniel directly asked. Christmas that year was spent at the Harringtons' home in Lake Forest, an estate that made me feel like I had walked onto a movie set. Vanessa's mother, Victoria, greeted me with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're so pleased you could join us," she said, in a tone that suggested the opposite. I was given a guest room in a separate wing from Jackson. At dinner, seated far from my son, I felt increasingly invisible as conversation flowed around me about people and places I didn't know. When I tried to share stories about Jackson's childhood, Victoria smoothly changed the subject. That night, unable to sleep, I went to the kitchen for some water. As I approached, I heard Vanessa's voice. "Honestly, Jackson, couldn't you have prepared me better? Those scars are worse than you described. How did you even grow up with that staring at you across the breakfast table every day?" I froze, waiting for my son to defend me. I know, Jackson sighed. "It's just always been this way. I don't really notice it anymore." "Well, I notice," Vanessa replied. My mother is already concerned about wedding photos. Maybe there's a specialist in the city who could help? Some advanced cosmetic procedure. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain they would hear it. I retreated silently to my room, tears burning trails down my scarred cheeks. The next morning I made an excuse about not feeling well, and took an early train home. Jackson didn't question my sudden departure, which hurt almost more than the conversation I had overheard. I told myself they were young, image-conscious, and living in a world different from mine. I made excuses for Jackson's behavior, remembering how he had once looked at me with nothing but love in his eyes. Surely this was just a phase, a temporary adjustment as he established himself professionally. 3 months later, Jackson called with news that he and Vanessa were engaged. The proposal had happened at her parents' country club, with an enormous diamond that had been in the Harrington family for generations. I congratulated him, pushing down the hurt that I hadn't been included in this milestone moment. "We're thinking spring wedding next year at the Harrington estate," he said, excitement in his voice. "Very exclusive, just 300 of our closest friends and family." 300 people seem like anything but exclusive to me, but I simply said I was happy for them. "Vanessa's mother is handling most of the planning," he added quickly. "But I'm sure there will be ways for you to help too, Mom." His words were meant to be reassuring, but they felt like another small rejection. I was being managed, kept at a comfortable distance from the important decisions in my son's life. 6 months before the wedding, I called Jackson to offer my help with the preparations. I had set aside some money to contribute, though I knew the Harringtons wouldn't need it. "That's really nice, Mom," Jackson said, sounding distracted. "Let me check with Vanessa and her mother. They have most things under control." A week later, he called back with a list of possible tasks I could assist with: researching wedding favors, helping address invitations, and collecting RSVPs from his father's side of the family. None of these involved actual decision-making or required my presence at planning meetings. I accepted these assignments graciously, telling myself that being involved in any capacity was better than being excluded entirely. When I mailed my suggestions for wedding favors, personalized bookmarks with quotes about love, Vanessa's mother sent a brief email. "Thank you for your input. We've decided to go with custom champagne flutes instead." One Saturday in February, Jackson called to invite me to shop for my mother-of-the-groom dress. I was touched by the gesture until he added, "Vanessa's mother suggested Ellington's department store. They have a good selection for mature women." Ellington's was known for its conservative fashions. I understood the subtext: find something that won't draw attention. Still, I was excited to participate in this traditional aspect of wedding preparation. The shopping trip quickly became an exercise in humiliation. The saleswoman, after giving me a once-over, directed me to a section filled with shapeless outfits in muted colors. "We want something that will blend nicely with the wedding palette," she explained. Something understated. Each time I selected a dress with any personality: a deep blue with silver accents, a rose-colored ensemble with delicate beading, she would purse her lips and suggest something more appropriate. Jackson and Vanessa sat on a nearby couch, whispering to each other whenever I emerged from the dressing room. After trying on the 8th forgettable beige dress, I overheard Vanessa say, "Maybe we should just hire a stylist to handle this." Jackson nodded, checking his watch for the 4th time in an hour. I finally settled on a pale gray dress with a high neckline and long sleeves, despite it being a spring wedding. Everyone seemed relieved when I made my choice, as if a potential crisis had been averted. As the wedding date approached, my attempts to connect with Vanessa were consistently rebuffed. I invited her to lunch, hoping to establish some relationship with my future daughter-in-law, but she always had excuses: dress fittings, meetings with the wedding planner, brunch with her bridesmaids. One evening, I invited Jackson to dinner alone, determined to address the growing distance between us. We met at a quiet restaurant near my home. "I feel like I'm being kept at arm's length with the wedding preparations," I said carefully after we ordered. "I understand the Harringtons are handling most things, but I'm your mother. I want to be part of your special day." Jackson sighed, setting down his water glass. "Mom, you're making this about you. Weddings are stressful enough without adding extra complications." "What complications would I add?" I asked, genuinely confused. He looked uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes. You know what I mean. Vanessa's family has certain expectations. They move in specific circles. This wedding is important for my career too. Many of the partners and their wives will be attending. And you're worried I won't fit in with these people, I finished for him. Because of how I look. Don't put words in my mouth, Jackson snapped. You're overreacting as usual. This is exactly why we've been cautious about involving you too much. His words hit like physical blows. Overreacting? Jackson, I've spent my entire life being stared at, whispered about, and judged based on my appearance. I thought my own son was different. Of course I'm different, he said, lowering his voice as nearby diners glanced our way. But you have to understand, this wedding isn't just about family. It's about connections, impressions. Vanessa's father could open doors for me at his investment firm. This matters for my future. I sat back, suddenly seeing the stranger my son had become. And I'm what? An inconvenient reminder of your less polished past. The conversation deteriorated from there. Jackson accused me of trying to make him feel guilty, of not supporting his ambitions. I left the restaurant with tears streaming down my face, wondering where I had gone wrong in raising him. The final blow came when I was browsing social media and discovered photos from a wedding planning weekend at the Harrington estate. There was Jackson, Vanessa, her parents, and even Harold's sister Angela, all smiling around a table covered with fabric swatches and flower arrangements. I hadn't even known about the event. I called Jackson immediately, hurt and angry. Why wasn't I invited to the planning weekend? Even Angela was there. There was a long pause before he answered. Mom, we didn't think you'd be comfortable. Angela gets along well with the Harringtons, and she has experience with these types of social events. These types of social events, I repeated. You mean events where appearance matters more than character? Where your mother's scars might make people uncomfortable? That's not fair, Jackson protested weakly. No, what's not fair is being excluded from my only child's wedding planning because I don't fit the aesthetic, I said, my voice breaking. What's not fair is watching you become someone who values status over the person who sacrificed everything for you. It was our first serious argument about the wedding, but it wouldn't be the last. 3 weeks before the wedding, I was reviewing RSVPs and finalizing my travel arrangements when Jackson called. His voice had that forced casual tone that immediately put me on alert. Hey Mom, just checking in about the wedding details, he began. Everything's set, I assured him. My dress is altered, I've confirmed my hotel reservation, and I'll be arriving the day before the rehearsal dinner. There was a pause followed by the sound of a door closing. He was seeking privacy for this conversation, which made my stomach tighten with apprehension. About the rehearsal dinner and the ceremony, he said slowly. We've had to make some adjustments to the seating arrangements. Oh? Where will I be sitting? I had assumed I would be at the family table for the rehearsal dinner and in the front row at the ceremony, as is traditional for the mother of the groom. Another pause. Well, for the rehearsal dinner, we've had to limit the head table to just the wedding party and the Harringtons. You'll be at table 3 with some of my colleagues. I see, I said, though I didn't, not really. And the ceremony? Jackson cleared his throat. This is difficult to explain, but the wedding planner has been very specific about the visual flow of the ceremony. The photographer has a certain aesthetic he's trying to achieve. My hand tightened around the phone. What are you trying to say, Jackson? It might be better if you sat in one of the back rows, he finally said. The front section will be captured in most of the ceremony photos, and the planner thinks it would create a more cohesive look if your scarred mother isn't visible. I finished, my voice barely audible. Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be, Jackson sighed. This wedding is very important for my future with Meridian and with the Harringtons. Their social circle includes some very influential people. So influential that they can't bear to look at burned scars during a wedding ceremony? I asked, tears welling in my eyes. It's not like that, he protested, but his voice lacked conviction. It's just about creating a certain atmosphere. The wedding has a very specific visual theme, and we need to maintain the aesthetic. The word aesthetic pierced my heart like a knife. My son was telling me that my face, the face that had smiled over his crib, kissed his scraped knees, beamed with pride at his graduations, would ruin the look of his wedding. I understand, I said, though I felt nothing but confusion and pain. You're ashamed of me. I'm not ashamed, Jackson insisted. I just need this day to be perfect. Vanessa's family has spent a fortune, and their friends have certain expectations. What about your expectations, Jackson? The values I raised you with? When did appearances become more important than people? You're being dramatic, he said dismissively. It's just a seating arrangement. But it wasn't just a seating arrangement. It was the culmination of years of subtle rejections, of watching my son transform from a compassionate boy who defended his scarred mother to a man who saw me as a liability to his social climbing. After we hung up, I collapsed onto my couch and sobbed, deep, guttural cries that seemed to come from the very core of my being. I cried for the little boy I had lost, for the mother I had tried to be, for the betrayal that cut deeper than any knife. As the tears subsided, memories flooded back. Selling my wedding ring to pay for Jackson's senior class trip. Working night shifts so he could have the same brand name clothes as his friends. Driving 4 hours each way to bring him home when he got homesick his first month of college. Sitting alone at holidays when he chose to spend them with friends. All the sacrifices I had made. All the love I had given. And it had led to this moment, being told I was too ugly to sit in the front row of my own son's wedding. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my living room until dawn, examining photos of Jackson throughout his life. When had he changed? When had status and appearance become his measuring stick for value? More importantly, what was I going to do about it? By morning, I had made my decision. I wouldn't create a scene or refuse to attend the wedding. I would go. I would sit where I was told. I would smile and pretend that my heart wasn't breaking. But I would also take steps to protect myself and my dignity. I called Alexander Preston, the attorney who had helped me with Harold's estate, and had become a trusted friend over the years. I need to make changes to my will. I told him when we met in his office later that day. Significant changes. Alexander listened without judgment as I explained the situation and my decision. Few people knew the extent of my financial success. The investments Frank had helped me make had grown substantially. Additionally, I had received a considerable inheritance when Harold's parents passed away, and my position at the family business now included profit sharing that had accumulated over years. Are you certain about this, Barbara? Alexander asked gently. Emotions are running high right now. I've never been more certain of anything, I replied. My son has made it clear that my value to him is determined by my appearance and what I can do for his social standing. I need to make arrangements that reflect my own values. Over the next 2 days we drafted a new will. Jackson would receive a small inheritance, enough to show I hadn't forgotten him, but a fraction of what he might have expected. The bulk of my estate would be divided between a foundation for burn survivors and a medical research grant for reconstructive surgery innovations. Alexander ensured the will was properly executed and would withstand any potential challenges. The document included a detailed letter explaining my decisions, to be delivered to Jackson after my passing. But I wasn't planning to die anytime soon. I was planning to disappear. I want to start over somewhere new, I told Alexander. Somewhere no one knows me or my history. That's a drastic step, he cautioned. Sometimes drastic steps are necessary for survival, I replied. I've spent my life being defined by other people's reactions to my scars. I want to find out who I am without that burden, and without the burden of a son who sees me as an embarrassment. With Alexander's help, I began quietly liquidating some assets and making arrangements for a new life. I would attend Jackson's wedding as planned, but it would be the last time he saw me for a very long time. The night before the wedding I sat alone in my hotel room, mentally preparing myself for what was to come. I wasn't angry anymore, just deeply, profoundly sad. But beneath the sadness was a growing sense of liberation. Soon I would be free from seeking approval from those who could never see beyond surface appearances. I woke before sunrise on Jackson's wedding day, my stomach in knots. The hotel room felt sterile and impersonal, much like my relationship with my son had become. I took extra care with my appearance, applying the specialized makeup techniques I had learned years ago to minimize the contrast of my scars. My hair was professionally styled the day before, and my simple gray dress hung pressed in the closet. As I dressed, I avoided meeting my own eyes in the mirror. This wasn't about how I looked today. It was about honoring a commitment to be present, even when presence wasn't particularly wanted. The wedding was scheduled for 2 o'clock at St. Agnes Cathedral, with a reception to follow at the Harrington estate. I arrived early, clutching a small gift box containing a pocket watch that had belonged to Harold. Despite everything, I wanted Jackson to have this piece of his father with him today. The cathedral was already bustling with activity. Florists arranged elaborate displays of white roses and hydrangeas. Photographers adjusted equipment and tested lighting. Wedding coordinators with headsets darted about, checking items off clipboards. No one paid any attention to the modestly dressed older woman standing uncertainly in the foyer. When I approached one of the coordinators to ask where I should go, she glanced at her seating chart. "Barbara Jenkins? You're in section C, 3rd row from the back on the right side," she said without looking up. "An usher will direct you when it's time." I nodded and retreated to a quiet corner to wait. The gift box felt heavy in my hands. I had hoped to give it to Jackson before the ceremony, but there seemed to be no opportunity. The groom and groomsmen were sequestered in a room at the back of the church, and every time I approached, I was politely but firmly redirected. Eventually, I handed the box to another coordinator. "Please make sure my son gets this before the ceremony," I said. She nodded distractedly and added it to a table of gifts. As guests began to arrive, I observed the parade of wealth and status that characterized Vanessa's social circle. Women in designer dresses and expertly applied makeup air-kissed each other and exclaimed over the decor. Men in tailored suits discussed stock options and golf handicaps. I recognized some of Jackson's colleagues from previous brief encounters, but none acknowledged me. When it was time to be seated, a young usher led me to my assigned row. As promised, it was far back from the altar, positioned so that I would be virtually invisible in any ceremony photos. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, as the church filled around me. The ceremony itself was like watching a movie where I recognized one of the actors but couldn't quite remember from where. Jackson, in his designer tuxedo, looked like a stranger. When he recited his vows to Vanessa, his voice carried the confident polish of his new life. No trace of the boy who had once looked at me with unconditional love. Not once during the ceremony did Jackson glance toward my section of the church. His eyes remained fixed on Vanessa, on her parents in the front row, on the official photographer capturing every perfect moment. I was a ghost at my own son's wedding. After the ceremony, guests were directed to the Harrington estate for the reception. The sprawling property had been transformed into a fairy tale setting, with twinkling lights strung through trees and white tents housing bars and serving stations. A string quartet played as attendants passed champagne and hors d'oeuvres. My place card was at table 19, positioned at the far edge of the reception area with distant relatives of the Harringtons whom I had never met. They made polite conversation about the weather and the lovely ceremony, while stealing curious glances at my scars when they thought I wouldn't notice. Dinner was served, speeches were made. Vanessa's father spoke at length about the bright future ahead for the couple, and the privilege of welcoming Jackson into their family. Jackson's best man, a colleague from Meridian, told sanitized stories of their friendship that contained no mention of Jackson's life before Chicago. No one asked me to speak. After the meal, Jackson and Vanessa made their obligatory rounds to each table. When they reached mine, Jackson performed the expected introduction. "Vanessa, you remember my mother," he said quickly, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape. "Of course," Vanessa smiled her practiced smile. "Thank you for coming, Barbara." "No, Mom." No acknowledgement of my role in raising the man she had just married. Just Barbara. Like I was a distant acquaintance. "Congratulations to you both," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I wish you every happiness." "Thanks, Mom," Jackson replied, already turning toward the next table. "Enjoy the rest of the evening." And then they were gone, swept back into the orbit of more important guests. I watched them laugh with the Harringtons, pose for photos with the wedding party, dance their first dance as husband and wife. Not once did Jackson look my way again. I left before the cake cutting. No one noticed my departure. As I waited for the taxi I had called, I took one last look at the celebration continuing without me. Jackson was at the center of a group of Vanessa's friends, his arm around her waist, his face alight with laughter. He looked happy in his new world. A world where I clearly had no place. In the taxi driving away from the Harrington estate, I felt an unexpected sense of peace settle over me. I had done my duty as a mother. I had shown up. I had wished them well. Now I was free to focus on my own healing. The week after the wedding passed in a blur of purposeful activity. I met with Alexander to finalize all the legal details of my new will and my planned disappearance. We established a system where he would be my only point of contact with my old life, managing my financial affairs and forwarding any truly urgent matters. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Barbara?" Alexander asked during our final meeting. "It's not too late to reconsider." "I've never been more certain," I replied. "For the first time in decades, I'm making a choice completely for myself." Jackson and Vanessa had left for a 3-week honeymoon in the Maldives. He had sent a brief text the day after the wedding. "Thanks for coming. Talk when we get back." No acknowledgement of how I had been treated. No recognition of how painful the day had been for me. Just another check mark on his list of obligations fulfilled. I didn't respond. There would be time for words later if they were ever needed. My house sold quickly, the real estate market was strong, and I had priced it fairly. Most of my furniture went to charity, except for a few treasured pieces I had shipped to my new address. I donated clothes I no longer needed and packed only what would fit in my car for the journey. The hardest part was sorting through photographs and mementos. Each item carried memories, some beautiful, some now tainted. I created a small box of keepsakes that Alexander would store for me. Things I might want again someday when the pain had dulled. Everything else was either discarded or packed away. My new home was a small beachfront cottage in a quiet coastal town in North Carolina, purchased through an LLC Alexander had established. The community was known for its privacy and laid-back atmosphere. A place where people minded their own business and newcomers were welcomed without excessive curiosity. The day before my departure, I visited Harold's grave. It was a beautiful spring morning, birds singing in the cemetery's old oak trees. I placed fresh flowers by his headstone and sat on the small bench nearby. "I'm doing what I need to do," I told him softly. "I think you would understand. You always saw me, really saw me when no one else did." I left a sealed envelope on his grave, weighted down with a small stone. Inside was a letter to Jackson that Alexander would direct him to if he ever truly sought answers. It explained my disappearance without bitterness or recrimination. Just honest words about pain and healing and the need for self-respect. My last stop was the bank, where I withdrew enough cash to sustain me until I was settled in my new location. My accounts had been restructured, with new ones established under my maiden name. Alexander had connections who helped ensure the transition was legal but difficult to trace. That night, I slept in my empty house one final time, surrounded by echoes of a life I was leaving behind. I cried, but not from sadness. These were tears of release, of letting go of expectations and disappointments that had bound me for too long. I left before dawn, driving east toward the rising sun. My car contained the essentials for my new beginning: clothes, personal documents, a few books, and the quiet determination to create a life defined by my own terms. The cottage was exactly as pictured. Small but bright, with windows facing the ocean and a wraparound porch perfect for morning coffee and evening reflection. I spent the first day simply sitting by the water, listening to waves crash against the shore, and feeling the weight of the past gradually lifting from my shoulders. Over the following weeks, I established a simple routine: morning walks on the beach, afternoons volunteering at a local community center, evenings reading or watching the sunset. I introduced myself to neighbors as Barbara Adams, recently widowed and looking for a peaceful place to start over. No one questioned my scars or my story. At the community center, I met Diane, the director of a support group for burn survivors. When she learned about my experience living with facial scars for most of my life, she invited me to speak to the group. "Your perspective could be valuable," she said, "especially for the younger members who are just learning to navigate the world with their scars." My first meeting with the group was transformative. Looking around the circle at faces marked by various degrees of burn injuries, I felt an immediate connection. These people understood without explanation. When I shared my story, edited to protect my privacy, heads nodded in recognition of the familiar struggles. A 16-year-old girl named Tessa approached me afterward. "How did you do it?" she asked. "How did you build a life when everyone stares all the time?" "You recognize that their stares define them, not you," I told her. "And you find the people who see beyond the surface." My involvement with the support group expanded into volunteer work at the regional burn center. I began visiting patients, particularly children and teenagers struggling with new injuries. The work filled me with purpose in a way nothing had since raising Jackson. 6 months passed with no contact from my son. According to Alexander's brief updates, Jackson had attempted to reach me several times after returning from his honeymoon, but had eventually stopped trying. He seemed to accept my explanation that I needed time away to travel and reflect. What Jackson didn't know, what he couldn't know yet, was that I had found freedom in his rejection. The pain of his betrayal had forced me to confront a lifetime of seeking approval and acceptance from others. In walking away, I had reclaimed my power to define my own worth. By Christmas, I had established a small circle of friends in my new community. We gathered for a holiday dinner at Diane's house, where no one cared about designer labels or social connections. The conversation was genuine, the laughter real. As I looked around the table at these people who accepted me exactly as I was, I realized I had found my true family. Almost exactly 1 year after the wedding, Alexander called with news. "Jackson contacted me," he said without preamble. "He's in some financial difficulty and wanted to discuss accessing his trust fund early." I sat down slowly, my heart racing. "What did you tell him?" "I explained that there had been changes to your estate planning," Alexander replied carefully. "I didn't give details, but I made it clear that his expectations might need adjustment." "How did he react?" "Initially with disbelief, then anger," Alexander said. "He demanded to know specifics. When I declined, citing client confidentiality, he asked me to arrange a meeting with you." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "And what did you say to that?" "That I would pass along his request but couldn't promise anything." Alexander paused. "Barbara," he sounded desperate. "Not just about money. He mentioned that he's been trying to find you for months." This was the moment I had both dreaded and anticipated. Part of me wanted to maintain the clean break, to continue building my new life without reopening old wounds. But another part, the mother who had loved her son through everything, needed to know more. "What kind of financial trouble?" I asked. Alexander sighed. "From what I gathered, he's overextended. The lifestyle he and Vanessa established isn't sustainable on his salary alone. There have been some tensions with the Harringtons as well. I think he expected more direct financial support from them than has materialized." "I see," I said, though the irony wasn't lost on me. Jackson had chosen image and status over authentic relationships, and now that choice was proving costly in multiple ways. Over the next few days, I considered my options carefully. I had no desire to rescue Jackson financially. That would only reinforce the transactional nature our relationship had developed. But perhaps there was an opportunity here for something more meaningful than money, truth. I called Alexander with my decision. "I'm not ready to meet with him yet, but I think it's time he understood some things. Send him the letter I left at Harold's grave, and tell him where to find the additional letter I included with my will. These letters contain no accusations or guilt trips, just honest reflections on what had happened between us. I had written them during those first painful weeks after the wedding, pouring out my hurt, but also my hopes that someday Jackson might remember the values he had been raised with." 3 days later, Alexander called again. "Jackson received your letters," he said. He was quite shaken. "He asked a lot of questions about your current situation, if you're safe, if you're well. He seems genuinely concerned. Did you tell him about my foundation work?" I had established a small foundation for burn survivors using some of my assets, providing scholarships and support services. "I gave him the broad outlines," Alexander confirmed. "Nothing that would help him locate you, but enough to understand you've built a meaningful life." "Thank you," I said. "If he contacts you again, You can tell him I'm open to a phone conversation. Just a conversation, nothing more at this point. 2 weeks passed before Jackson called. Alexander had arranged the details so my location remained private. When I answered, the line was silent for several seconds. Mom. Jackson's voice sounded smaller than I remembered, less certain. Hello, Jackson, I said, surprised by my own calm. I don't even know where to begin, he said. Your letters. I had no idea how much I hurt you. I think you did, I replied gently. You just had other priorities at the time. He didn't deny it. I've made a mess of things, Mom. Not just with you. With everything. Tell me, I said, and he did. The perfect marriage had quickly revealed its cracks. Vanessa's spending habits and expectations had created financial strain. Her parents' promises of career advancement came with strings attached that Jackson found increasingly difficult to accept. Without my emotional support, which he had taken for granted until it was gone, he felt adrift in a world of superficial connections. The day after the wedding, when I couldn't find you to say a proper goodbye, I didn't think much of it, he admitted. I just assumed you'd left early because you felt uncomfortable. It wasn't until weeks later, when all my calls went unanswered, that I realized something was seriously wrong. And what did you think then? I asked. Honestly, I was annoyed, he said with painful honesty. I thought you were punishing me for the seating arrangement, for not making you more central to the wedding. It took months before I started to really question my own behavior, to see things from your perspective. We talked for nearly 2 hours. I didn't offer easy forgiveness or promises to return. Jackson didn't ask for money or quick solutions. It was just two people beginning the slow, difficult work of understanding each other again. Can I call you again? He asked as our conversation wound down. Yes, I said. But Jackson, I need you to know that I'm not coming back to my old life. I've found peace here. Whatever relationship we rebuild will have to accommodate that reality. I understand, he said, though I wondered if he truly did. Over the following months, our calls became regular. Jackson shared his struggles and small victories as he worked to reshape his priorities. He and Vanessa had entered counseling, trying to build a more authentic relationship beneath the perfect facade. He had taken a different position at work, lower profile but more aligned with his actual values. I shared selective details about my new life, my work with burn survivors, the small garden I had planted, the stray cat I had adopted. I didn't tell him where I lived or offer invitations to visit. Those boundaries remained important to my healing. During this time, I developed an unexpected friendship with Thomas, a widower who lived down the beach from my cottage. Our relationship evolved slowly, built on shared early morning walks and gradual confidences. When I finally told him the full story of my past, he listened without judgment. We all have scars, he said simply. Some are just more visible than others. A year and a half after the wedding, I agreed to meet Jackson in person. We chose a neutral location, a small inn in Virginia where Alexander had helped arrange a private dining room. When Jackson saw me, his eyes filled with tears. Mom, he said, stepping forward uncertainly. I opened my arms, and he moved into them like the little boy he had once been. We both cried, releasing emotions too complex for words. Our conversation that day was honest but gentle. We acknowledged the pain we had caused each other without seeking to assign blame. Jackson spoke about his journey toward recognizing the shallowness of the life he had pursued. I kept thinking about what Dad would say if he could see how I treated you, he said, his voice breaking. He would be so disappointed in me. Your father would want you to learn and grow, I replied. That's what matters now. We didn't solve everything in that one meeting. Healing takes time, and some wounds leave permanent marks on relationships just as burns leave scars on skin. But we established a new foundation based on mutual respect and honesty. Before we parted, Jackson asked the question I had been expecting. Will you ever come back? This is not about geography, I told him. It's about finding myself outside of other people's perceptions. For the first time in my life, I'm not defined by my scars or by being someone's mother or wife. I need to honor that journey. He nodded, disappointment visible but acceptance growing. I understand. I just miss you. We'll find our way forward, I promised. It just might not look like what either of us expected. Today, 3 years after I sat in the third row of my son's wedding, I've built a life rich with purpose and genuine connections. My foundation has helped dozens of burn survivors access treatment and support. Thomas and I share a deep companionship that asks nothing of either of us except authenticity. Jackson and I speak regularly. He and Vanessa have worked through many of their early challenges, though I suspect they always will. Their first child, my granddaughter, was born last spring. I've met her twice during carefully planned visits. Jackson respects my boundaries while continuing to hope for more frequent connection. The most important lesson I've learned through this journey is that true beauty has nothing to do with smooth skin or perfect features. It emerges from the courage to honor your own worth, even when those closest to you fail to see it. Sometimes walking away isn't an act of revenge but an act of self-preservation and ultimately, self-love. I often think about that day in the third row, watching my son marry into a world that had no place for his scarred mother. The pain was real, but it led me to a freedom I might never have found otherwise. In losing what I thought I needed, my son's approval and acceptance, I found what I truly required, my own. What about you? Have you ever had to choose between someone you love and your own dignity? Did you stay or walk away? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by anyone else's perception. Thank you for listening, and remember, the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself.